She was sleeping in row 10 when the captain asked, "Any combat pilots on board?" The cabin was quiet, almost too quiet. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly, a quilt of clouds lit softly by the afternoon sun. Inside, passengers settled into their routines, some flipping through magazines, some scrolling on phones, and some, like the woman in row 10, drifting into sleep. Her head rested against the window. Her breathing was slow. She looked like any other traveler escaping the noise of the world for a few hours of peace. And then a voice came over the intercom, firm but trembling. "Ladies and gentlemen." A pause, then. "If there is any combat pilot on board, please make yourself known immediately." The air changed. The soft hum of conversation stopped. Eyes widened. Children looked up from their games. You could feel the tension ripple through the cabin like a wave. The woman in row 10 stirred, opened her eyes, and blinked. For a moment she wondered if she was dreaming, but no, the captain had said it again. "If there is any combat pilot on board, please come forward. Announcements like turbulence or delays are common, but this was unheard of. Combat pilot," whispered a man in the aisle seat. "What does that even mean?" murmured a mother clutching her child's hand. But in row 10 the woman's heart began to race. Her name was Captain Sarah Bennett, though no one on this flight knew that. She had served 12 years as a fighter pilot, flying missions over dangerous territories, escorting cargo planes, and performing aerial refueling under fire. She had medals she never spoke of, stories she never told. 2 years ago she'd left that life. She had promised herself she'd never touch another cockpit, except in a simulator. But as she listened to the urgency in the captain's voice, something inside her stirred the part of her trained to act, not hesitate. She sat still for a moment, weighing her options. She could stay seated, pretend she hadn't heard, hope someone else stood up. But the cabin had gone completely silent now. No one was moving. No one else was standing. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt. Slowly she stood, her knees steady though her hands trembled. Passengers turned to watch her as she stepped into the aisle. She approached the flight attendant at the front. "I'm a combat pilot," she said quietly, showing her old Air Force ID still tucked in her wallet. "What's happening?" The attendant's eyes widened with relief and fear at the same time. "Come with me," she whispered. Sarah followed her to the cockpit door. The sound of alarms and beeping grew louder. She stepped inside, and her world shifted. The cockpit was a storm of noise and flashing lights. The captain's face was pale, his hands gripping the yoke. The co-pilot was slumped in his seat, paramedics not yet on board to help him. "We've lost one engine," the captain said quickly. "And my co-pilot collapsed 10 minutes ago. We're 150 miles from the nearest airport. Weather's worsening. I can't land this alone." Sarah felt a jolt in her chest. This wasn't a fighter jet. This was a massive commercial aircraft, 3 times heavier than anything she had ever flown. But lift, drag, thrust, the principles were the same. She looked the captain in the eye. "I can help," she said firmly, "but you'll have to walk me through your systems." He nodded, relief flickering across his face. "Strap in." As she settled into the co-pilot's seat, memories rushed back: the roar of engines on an aircraft carrier, the smell of hydraulic fluid, the weight of hundreds of lives behind her decisions. She took a deep breath. "Okay, let's do this." Outside, thunder cracked. The plane jolted, turbulence shaking the cabin. Passengers gasped, some praying softly. In the cockpit, Sarah's voice was calm. measured the voice of training taking over. Throttle back, adjusting flaps, tell me fuel levels. The captain read numbers, she absorbed them instantly. Together they ran through emergency checklists. She switched to manual control, feeling the heavy response of the plane under her hands. This wasn't like the split-second maneuvers of combat. This was slower, heavier, but just as deadly if she made the wrong move. Prepare for emergency landing. She called over the intercom. Everyone remained calm. Back in the cabin, people gripped their seats tighter. Parents held children closer. A woman whispered a prayer. A man took out his phone and typed a message he might never send. Sarah focused on the runway ahead, now visible through sheets of rain. It looked impossibly short, framed by hills. But she had landed on shorter strips under fire. She could do this. She had to. The descent began. The plane buffeted in crosswinds. Warning alarms blared. The captain called altitudes. Sarah adjusted pitch and roll. Her hands were steady now. Landing gear down, she commanded. A metallic thud echoed beneath them. Speed 160 knots, 150, 140. The runway rushed up. She made tiny corrections, fighting the wind. 1 second too late, and the plane would drift off the tarmac. Hold tight, she called. The wheels hit the ground with a bone, rattling screech. Smoke rose from the tires. She braked hard, feeling the plane shudder as it slowed. For a moment, time stretched then. Finally, the plane rolled to a stop. Silence. Then, as if a switch had flipped, applause erupted from the cabin. People cheered, cried, hugged strangers. Sarah's hands trembled. She let out a shaky breath. "We're safe," she whispered. Paramedics rushed aboard to tend to the co-pilot. The captain turned to Sarah, eyes shining with gratitude. "You just saved 212 lives," he said. Sarah looked at him, still trying to process what had happened. "I didn't do it alone," she said softly. "We did it." As she stepped back into the cabin, passengers reached out to touch her arm, to thank her, some with tears in their eyes. The seat in row 10 stood empty now, a silent reminder of how quickly life can change. Sometimes the skills we think we've left behind are exactly what the world needs at the right moment. Sometimes courage doesn't look like medals or headlines. It looks like a woman in row 10 quietly standing up when it mattered most. And sometimes, in a world of strangers, we're reminded that there are still people ready to rise when the call comes. Fade out with soft music, showing the plane safely on the runway as passengers disembark. Sarah walking quietly through the terminal,